All right, guys, good morning. Thank you all for coming out this week. I hope you're all enjoying the event and having a good week of building projects, meeting each other, and enjoying. I'm Alvaro. I'm the head of talent for Ava Labs. We switched it up a little bit for the audience. This was going to be a workshop on how to get hired in Web3, but just given the folks that we've kind of come through and builders, going to switch it up a little bit more for folks that are looking to grow their teams in an impactful way and really kind of think about how to scale your products, businesses, services, or whatever you're building on the blockchain effectively and hopefully quickly from the beginning. So this is a part of a bigger series that I've developed called the Founders Playbook. Today we'll just be going over some of the basic building blocks. If anybody has questions, wants to take a deeper dive, we will kind of open it up at the end a bit. But I always like to start these things with a small history of recruiting. Generally being a talent operator, I've seen a couple of different phases in the way that the industry has grown since I started recruiting 11 years ago after the 2008 financial crash, and was part of the reason I really got into blockchain. Luckily for me, I did still kind of start my recruiting career when it was a very big pen and paper business. I think everyone now thinks of recruiting and you think of LinkedIn and spam messages in your inbox, right? But fortunately, that wasn't how my kind of career in this space started. I think a lot of what recruiting really is at the end of the day, a people business. And I think that's one of the most important things to keep in mind when you're also just building out your own teams and how you want to build that culture and your hiring practices as you move forward. So when I started, it was very much that model where, I had a phone on my shoulder. It was constant calls all day, going home and looking at things like Zoom info to figure out what businesses were in my area and really trying to meet founders to understand like their true goals and what they were trying to do. A few years into it, we really started seeing the advancement of like tooling, right? Recruiting was one of the last industries to really start leveraging online spaces and online tools to really get a vast outreach and do more of the volume-based kind of stuff that you see now. I was also fortunate to work at an agency that had a team of 20 software engineers that were building out systems specifically to the way that we kind of managed processes, and eventually saw, a shift from what traditionally recruiting was seen as in terms of an HR function, right? Just really organizing interviews and kind of pushing paper along to more of a sales-driven type of role when, what I end up calling like BD for people. That's been a big, more impactful shift as of recent years just due to, the talent markets themselves. How many of you guys have tried to hire folks in the last year or two here? Someone tell me, how long did it take and how difficult was that for you? Yeah, so I mean, one of the things that we really try to do at Ava Labs is create a networking-based approach to recruiting to where I tell my founders, and they laughed at me at first, but it's all driven on being able to hire who you want, when you want, by utilizing and understanding that the scope of the markets makes it so that you should not waste interactions just trying to sell a position or see if you can fill a need. It's really more about working through these like exponential opportunity that's out there with the finite talent pools that really make a difference early on in your product builds. I think Gagan mentioned in terms of percentages how many developers in blockchain make up the total amount of developers in the world right now. I read an article that was on Medium and featured a quote by Joe Lubin from Consensus a few months ago. And I think he said like total was 30 million developers in the world right now. When you really look at blockchain, and the numbers thankfully increasing every month, but we were looking at blockchain developers in the hundreds of thousands. So it really illustrates not only how much the industry is still being adopted, but how much work and how much talent can still be pulled over in order to really do that. Now, I think we always talk about, blockchain in terms of like the trilemma, right? The funny thing is those things exist in every industry and just in the form of trade-offs. When you talk about the recruiter's trilemma, especially for a startup, it's something that you really have to think about, right? When I worked in the contingency space, was running my own agency for blockchain recruiting, constantly had to set expectations with clients and partners and let them know you can have quality, speed, and cost. You get to pick two, right? If you want them to be good and you want it fast, it's probably going to be pretty expensive, and so on and so forth. But every day when you think about talent, you really want to think about your structure in terms of what are your trade-offs and what are you willing to do in order to make your, hiring practices really impactful as well. At the end of the day, hiring is hard. If you're going out there and doing it in a very archaic way, it very rarely kind of pans out the way you need it to, and can be very uncontrolled and waste a lot of time for you and other like high value employees that you would rather have focusing on building your product, selling your product, optimizing your users, or what have you, right? So my approach is always to start with the end in mind. Not something that a lot of builders and operators really think about, because it's not a world you live in, but hopefully the rest of this presentation will give you a high-level sense for how you can do that for yourself. The very first thing I always look at is like taking a big kind of analysis and a look inward to really assess your needs and the alignment of the strategies that you want to execute. As I mentioned previously, it is a people business. So the tricky thing about people is that every one of them is different, including the person that's doing the hiring, right? So because you are a unique builder, you are building a company that's supposed to revolutionize and do things in a different way. You probably have certain things that will fit and kind of mold with you in comparison to the Steve Jobs of the world and the Bill Gates and whoever came before us in the last wave of really big, impactful products. So I think a lot of the things that you can really break it down into a few different things. Number one is just looking at skills gaps and trying to build well-rounded teams for yourself, right? If you are an engineer and you can build the product, focus on finding people that not only like have obviously a semblance of your approach and your goals, but that can round out the things that you're not good at. I was talking to some of the guys from Savvy last night, and we were talking a little bit more about, as a hiring manager and a hiring interviewer, a lot of times you gravitate to the people that remind you of yourself, but you really want to be careful with that. You want a piece of that, but you want others that are very different, bring another point of view, and can find the gaps and the obstacles that you don't always, find yourself. One other big category is looking at, strategists versus producers. A lot of times, if you are a strategist at heart, you have all the ideas, you know how they're going to work, you may not need another loud voice in the room right away. You may want to go out and find someone that can just go and execute the work hands-on. Going to the next kind of area, Web 2 to Web 3. I think one thing that we always are guilty of as talent leaders is wanting to find the fully tailored package right away, which is not always the case. I think as an industry, we can do a lot more to help onboard people from the traditional spaces and really attract them to working with us and kind of spending some time educating. Hiring and career development should be a trade-off at the end of the day. I should be able to help you in your career, and you should be able to help me build my product. You also want to, look for iterative learners. You see people that are constantly learning, talking about crypto, blockchain, but have not built anything. It can be a tough thing to identify, but we always focus on searches at Ava Labs, especially on pulling people that have done really great work, but are really passionate about the space and can make that transition over with a little bit of time. We'll talk a little bit about hiring spaces and funnels for talent. I know for anyone that's ever posted a job, it can be very tedious to have to sort through those things. And then some of the tools and processes that I use in order to make that a little more effective and manage my day so that I can focus on speaking with people, doing the networking, and getting to know people in the industry, as opposed to pushing paper around and clicking buttons throughout the organization. So, skills gaps. Building those well-rounded teams. Just a little bit of a deeper dive there. The first question is always to be honest with yourself and take a look in the mirror, especially when you're a really talented, impressive person that's built something on your own. Hard to come to the realization of what you are and what you're not good at. I know I'm guilty of this sometimes when I, build teams and try to have to give something up to somebody else. I find it very hard actually just letting go of what I would consider my baby, right? So it can be pretty tough. You also want to get a sense for your bandwidth. Recruiting can be a very, very time-consuming task, but it's what I always call the first domino in an organization, and hiring the right people ultimately should be a multiplier. So it's interesting how little time folks spend, actually developing a recruiting process and thinking about it at the beginning. When if you really think about hiring 2 to 3 people that can do a really good job and spare that same amount of time on your plate, how much more effective and how much quicker do you think you could grow your product if that was the case, right? Another thing we look at is like the difference between athletes and specialists. Most people in startups do try to hire those folks that can wear different hats throughout the organization, pick up a job here or there. But when I'm looking at talent or folks that we're looking to hire, that shouldn't always be the case. There is a time in an organization where too many cooks in the kitchen can be a problem. And there are phases where you really need to develop something and get a really granular, detailed kind of product out. And you should look at a specialist early on. So understanding where your product is and how that product need fits will really give you a good sense for what type of profile you should be going after. And then, looking at different leadership styles. Some builders are very managerial, know the process, know how something should be done, but they're not necessarily a leader, right? You really find, it's rare to find a great balance of both, but you really find that most people tend to lean on one side of the spectrum. And not only do you need someone that can lay a roadmap for people, but you really want that person that people are going to gravitate towards and want to follow. Final thing is growth rates and verticals. Going back to the archaic way of just doing recruiting, I find a lot of times that not enough organizations pay attention to things like setting goals, removing blockers for their employees, and really getting a granular feel for what every position does on a day-to-day basis. I find myself in this trap a lot with candidates, clients, hiring managers, what have you. Everyone comes to me with a title and a goal. But very few people know how to string that together and tell me why is it that a certain skill applies and how often are this person going to use it to triangulate the right, skill set overall. There's hundreds of thousands and millions of software engineers out there, but there's only a select few that really strike the right balance of hands-on coding versus architecture versus team management. And when you really know where that sits on the spectrum, it almost becomes a superpower to your recruiting because you can really cut down and narrow down a list that you can pretty much be confident is going to be impactful on the day that they get into your seat. And then the final thing is, of course, monitoring outcomes, right? I think for a lot of folks, we kind of hire someone to take something over, you kind of leave it there and don't come back for months before you realize that things aren't really getting done. So maybe difficult in a lot of ways, but try to set, deliverables and KPIs that are relevant to progress, not a goal. Getting in a little bit more into the strategists versus producers. This is basically what I use as my cheat sheet for once I understand that, refining, who do I need where in the organization. I think a lot of looking at Web2 and coming from other organizations, again, you try to find the problem and hire someone that you just want to hand that off to because as a founder or developer, you want to work on the things that are interesting to you, right? I think that's just a normal work and human psychology thing where most of us tend to focus on the things that we're confident we can deliver, and very few people want to run up or face a problem day in and day out that you're just not feeling like you're capable of solving. So when you're looking at what do I need? Do I need a production person? Do I need, a strategist? You really can do that by looking at traditional levels of experience and how people progress in their career. So if you are looking for a strategist, someone that needs the ideas, you do want to look at that VP level and above. For a lot of the production line folks, it's more of the mid to senior hands-on type of deal. But I generally find that senior manager to director level folks are kind of the sweet spot for early builders. Big reason why is they've been hands-on enough recently to understand what every one of your employees should be doing. If they need to get in the weeds, they can really just get hands-on and get things done. But they've seen enough of the strategic side of building an organization where they can help you roadmap and not necessarily want or need to take that over, right? One of the biggest things I do in recruiting is say one hand up, one hand down. So as a founder, I find that, targeting folks at that level is always a really, really impactful start to building your products and your teams. And one caveat that I always say to this is that blockchain is a meritocracy, right? So years of experience doesn't necessarily mean depth of experience. When I qualify these levels, I'm not looking at the title that you had before, I'm looking at the job that you do day to day, and does that fit what I would call a senior manager or director within my organization? Here's one of the more interesting ones, and I think this is a battle in terms of like, how do you hire really good talent into the Web3 space when you find so many people that are now just starting to get interested because they hear about Dogecoin, or an NFT on the news that blew up, and all of a sudden everybody's getting a taste and wants in, right? I can't tell you how many ex-Googlers, folks from other places now come to the table asking about how they can get involved in this space, and unfortunately I have to turn a lot of them away. I always say, watch what they do, not what they say. Anyone can get on a call and talk the talk and, have a really good understanding of blockchain because we're dealing with software engineers that are really smart people. It doesn't take more than a day online to really understand what's going on and configure that. But a lot of what I really look at is like, are you adopting those new skills that go along with your interests? What I call iterative builders, right? It's a new paradigm for technical infrastructure that a lot of people just can't grasp. I can't tell you how many coders I've worked with that are used to like coding to a single server environment, and all of a sudden you put them into a peer-to-peer distributed network, have no idea what they're doing, and just can't really even hang with some of our, most junior engineers in the company at the end of the day. Really, the remote as a new norm thing. I think Web3 has this like innate thing where everyone's kind of spread out and it's normal to be distributed all over the world. Again, talk to teams that were formed at our summit last year and met there from all different places and now are launching their product, 6 to 9 months later. So it's a very different kind of thing that is very attractive to Web2 folks, but I would always say that it's not necessarily always the best move either. But really understanding like your capabilities as a leader and how to like interact with teams online is something that can give you a good sense for whether that's something that you want to do or that's something that you need to do. And then expectations as a candid approach are really big. I think for a lot of people that have interest, not experience, you do want to hire passionate people that are capable of ramping up and learning quickly. But a lot of times we get the been there, done that profile that feels that they can learn, but it's more of a ownership kind of thing in terms of like previous accolades, which is not always going to cut the mustard if you're competing with a lot of companies building in the early stages of a new space. You really want those people that are willing to continue grinding and want to continue being hands-on and learning more. And then just, your access to open source code and communities can be a big way to make that transition as well. I tell folks that are always trying to get into the space that careers in blockchain are just as permissionless as the investing side of it, which is where I look for those iterative learners to really come from and develop their skills independently. So things like DAOs, Discord communities, Twitter communities, bounty programs, independent building projects, just coming to events like these and forming a team. If I see someone that has an absolutely amazing technical profile, but hasn't really done these things on their own, I don't necessarily trust that the passion is there to really make it through the hard times, right? One of the most difficult things for founders in the space now is that you're essentially, because of tokenization of assets, running a public company at the Series A stage, which really requires, folks that are going to be in it for the passion at the end of the day when things don't go wrong in a bear market like what we're in now. So, that's a lot of the philosophy in terms of hiring, but how do you really do that, right? Where do you really look for these things, and what kind of hiring spaces should you look at when trying to find these folks? One of the interesting things is that everyone in crypto wants to recruit on Twitter, Telegram, Discord. As much as I love that, and me and my team are actually really working hard on trying to develop just good processes in those spaces. It is one of the biggest mistakes that you can make in kind of thinking that LinkedIn or traditional web spaces are dead. Those can be very effective in that if you can follow some of the different clues or things that you're looking for, you can also engage with some of the most impactful people there. It's just not as public, or because it's not anonymous, they're not, out there stating as much. But there are ways and there are keywords and triggers in LinkedIn that you can use to find those people. And reality is it's just more effective with your time because they are like more connectable. you can scrape emails through tools and get more direct contact with them than you would in anonymous Web3 kind of space, right? While I love Twitter, I love every one of those spaces because of what it's done for me and my knowledge in the blockchain space. As a recruiter and as a builder, it can be very hard to go from that anonymous first step to hiring someone where effectively, if you're in the US, you do need to know who they are, right? So very interesting. You know, the revolution will not be televised, but there will be some coverage along the way. As far as tools and processes, I think this is also very ignored. Everyone does the right thing by starting. You good? Oh, sorry. As far as tools and processes, everyone does a really good job of going out, and I think the first thing every one of us wants to do is reach out to our networks and our networks, right? But if you're taking that networking, relationship-built approach, you really want to establish some things in terms of relationship management, being able to keep track of who you've spoken with and why you thought they were interesting, or maybe why they would be a better fit at a later stage. Very often we find ourselves at Ava Labs not being to hire everyone. It's not really a good fit, bad fit thing, but a best fit. And in a lot of those scenarios, what I truly want to do is we are going to get to a place where we're a larger company. The scope of talent will need to change. We will have more onboarding resources and training to really do that in a better way. So I always like to kind of set those expectations through the networking to let people know that your time will come. And by taking those conversations and doing it in the right way, hopefully we can kind of iterate or do that, hire who you want when you want type of mentality, right? As far as sourcing, we talked a little bit about the downfalls of doing that through Twitter, doing that through LinkedIn. There are a lot of really great tools that you can implement in terms of one that we use a lot is called Gem. Lets you download a PDF from LinkedIn and basically scrapes email and info and ports right back to our greenhouse applicant tracking systems where we really manage those relationships day to day. Again, another way that recruiting has become more of a BD for people type of business in the last 5 years. Nobody ever really thought of recruiting in that way. You take a resume, write a bunch of notes, and throw it in the trash can was the joke, right? I think these days more than ever, you really want to have a database and a bank of your interactions with people in the space that you can call on at any time. Yeah.
So the relationship and process management part of it, in terms of even building a CRM, as you're talking about it, I'm realizing for us, we talk to a lot of people. They might be partners, they might be people we work with, they might be people want to hire. How do you manage the CRM relationship part of it? And it seems like you do a really good job realizing you can talk to a lot of people and you never waste a conversation. So how do you do that at a startup level when we have 9 people? We're not hiring today, but they might be any one of those things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think it's still making a lot of decisions on who you take calls with and doing that, but you don't, like you said, want to waste a call. Having a system that fits your level, there's Lever for really small companies. We use Greenhouse as a mid-sized company. Some people use Bullhorn, Reach, and Salesforce once you really get to the enterprise level. Find a tool that works for you. A lot of it is just taking a LinkedIn profile or a resume and an email and pegging it into a system where you can look it up later. And the biggest thing there is attention, right? I can't tell you how many founders are so busy that they take an interview on the road or on a call while they're running somewhere. You get back to your busy day, and an hour later, you can't remember anything about that conversation if you've had something else come up. So really hold the space for that future interaction and that future space. Take your ATS, make sure you're paying attention to the person, write some notes, think about how you can help them and leave them with an impact so that they want to come back to you later. It goes back to that one hand up, one hand down thing where you want to be not only filling your own needs, but trying to help other people get into the space and find something that's a good home and something that's impactful for them.
Sorry, what was ATS?
There's Lever, which I like for applicant tracking systems. Mm-hmm. And then you have the onboarding and offers situation, which can also be kind of an afterthought. I remember my first day at Ava Labs, we were still 45 people. I got a call from Kevin Sicknicky. He said, hey, here's your Google account. This is Cheryl. This is Carrie Ann. Good luck. Which can be very difficult, right? You expect rock stars to kind of pick that up, and by and large, most will. But thinking about the onboarding process, thinking about, helping your employees and folks that you're working with understand what are your values, what is your why. We always think about that when we're formulating our projects, our companies, but we forget about that as we start just onboarding things and getting the work going. Yeah.
Actually, I have a cool story about that. I pulled on a new employee once. I pulled on a new employee once, and I provided him a video walkthrough of our latest contracts that I've written up, and it like blew his mind. So that kind of like high touch onboarding stuff, it like really made him happy.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That's great that you're doing that. There's a stat of people that quit their job within 3 months if they don't mean I forget the exact percentages, but it's a surprisingly large amount of people that quit their jobs in the first 6 months if they don't meet their manager in the first day. So creating a home for your people is really, important. Again, it's a people business. When times get hard in the bull market and your project is failing, you don't want those people looking out. You want the social ties that bond them to you to be the thing that you fall back on so that you can get through those hard times together, right? And yeah, I always say like blockchain leaders are operating public blockchains at a Series A kind of level. So in a lot of ways where in the past you didn't know what the value was for years at a time until you can get to that acquisition stage, your employees now have a very recent and a daily updated peg to what's going on with your investments. So when your token price drops, you don't want that to impact the morale and the behavior of everybody that you're working with day to day. I'm sure we've all seen that a little bit more recently, right? So then there's, the whole like BD for people, which is interesting because it almost feels like very transactional. I, for one, just hate being and feeling like a commodity at the end of the day. I always say we hire people, not paper as well. But when it really comes down to like closing the deal, just because you can hire someone doesn't mean you should, right? At the end of the day, you really want to look for that alignment for future growth. And do they have that passion that we've been talking about here for the last few minutes to overcome things when that strife really hits? It's a networking versus filling a need type approach, and I feel that that's very important when you're really building that long-term team. I mean, especially at Ava Labs, building an ecosystem and a huge layer 1 network, it's a complex thing where having to train and retrain people every 3 to 6 months just doesn't really, help the progress of the protocol. So anytime that we're talking to someone, I really want to make sure that it's something that you can see yourself growing within for the next 2 to 3 years. Part of that comes with sacrificing the speed of a hire to make sure that every one of our employees gets a touch point, feels comfortable with that person. And when I ask someone about their future goals, I want to know what the rest of the team's goals are as well so that they can all grow together and have a distribution that ultimately works. One engineer versus another is definitely something that everybody wants quickly, but finding the right puzzle pieces to fit are really what makes that unicorn product at the end of the day. And like I said, that last point is just in that same vein. Champion your team's growth. Be a proponent for their advancement, not just your own. And I guarantee you, people will want to work with you more often than not. So with that said, guys, thank you for taking the time. And if anybody has questions, happy to hang out here. And
What were the names of the ATS tools?
so there's a couple that work at different stages. I think if you're very early, Lever is a pretty decent tool. One of my favorites is called Good Time. I think that one's a little bit more advanced for later, but you can definitely start with that earlier. Once you hit like a mid-stage kind of company zone, start using more automation. I love Greenhouse. That's what we use at Ava Labs. And then growing into enterprise, you can get into a bunch of different HRISs, which kind of depend on what the rest of your teams use. But whenever you do look at an ATS, what I would say is take a look at their API integrations. One of the hardest things for any team to do is to slow down your day just to manually port over or enter data the right way and with accuracy. So whatever you do decide to use, try to develop or try to configure tools that work with each other already. It's one of the biggest time savers. I can start my process from an outreach message and get them all the way through every single function in my ATS with the click of 5 buttons.
When you're doing like the offer stage or like the closing, I guess, when I do that in the past as a hiring manager, I got pretty good at explaining like equity, like the I guess like the 409A price and options and all that. I'm interested in like your advice on like selling coins specifically, like just because it's liquid, especially if it's out there, like how they think about it, like tax compliant, like how do you pitch that in a way which is compelling in the way that,
Yeah, I
you
mean,
know, the world has become good at pitching like equity.
right. Quick question, just to make sure. Do you do tokens only? Do you do a share of private equity and tokens? Okay, cool.
But, you know, it's something you're giving, right? So you should be able to explain it in a way that's compliant and exciting. And
Yeah, no, I always, what I say is kind of the private equity gives you access to the picks and shovels of the business and the things that we're developing internally and ultimately the things that will have value to investors in the long term when we go for public valuations. But when you're getting we have a token pool or an equity pool that's pegged to tokens, which is a little bit more on the exposure side of like investment, right? So that can be very volatile at the end of the day. That can be very good or bad, but essentially is a way to have more liquidity in an early stage startup than you would at any traditional private startup company. That can also be very tricky because, like, for example, I don't know how often you do 409As, but we do them every quarter based on the average price of the previous quarter. So one of the most challenging things for my team is that if you look at where the market was, you know, there was a point where the AVAX token was $25 and our 409A exercise price was $87, right? So how do you explain that as a losing proposition to someone and why they should take that job? You really don't lean on the tokens. You lean on the team and what the future progress is and, you know, who they're going to be working with. If I'm sitting there and I'm saying I get to work with Eamon Gunsir and Patrick O'Grady and Ed Chang back there and Rocky, that's what makes me feel confident that that's going to come back up and hit that all-time high again. And Avery, of course. Sorry, man. You had another question? No. Yes.
Yeah, I have a similar question to what you're just talking about. So, like, let's say at the top of like the end of the bull run in Q1, where a lot of, let's say,
Oh. You okay?
oh,
Nice. Hey.
yeah.
Sorry, man. Go ahead. Continue.
Yeah, basically, so like a lot of DeFi protocols who might have hired talent back in Q1 and given like a token equity package that was predicated on valuations that were possible in Q1, but now are like, you know, probably compressed by like 75%. Like, what do you think those sorts of protocols should do to like retain talent or, or because
one of my biggest kind of like sells, and I kind of put my own neck out there every time I say it, is that we're not only trying to hire good people, but want to retain good people. That's the whole kind of approach to complexity and long-term building. So a lot of that is more of like a leap of faith for someone to say, hey, I believe you. Hopefully you've done a good enough job through the process where they feel like you are a good person and you do have their best interest in mind. But you got to work with your CFO to constantly update those things. That same situation I just talked about, at a certain point, we pulled some levers in order to get that down as much as possible. And it's just like investing. It's timing, right? Is it the right time to do that now and give an update to our employees? I've heard of other organizations that give employees a cash bonus to cover the cost of their taxes or the equity. So for employees that ended up paying more on taxes for tokens that they were given compared to what they're worth now, you know, the organizations that were on top of the ball there and understood how much that could hurt them, giving them, you know, whatever they owed in taxes and a cash bonus or some other structure is a lot cheaper than having to lose a team of engineers and delay your product at the end of the day. Yeah.
It's not like a question, it's more like advice, a cheat code, how to easily hire engineers if you're low on budget. Just go to Telegram, just find the community by this like language you're searching for, and that's it. That's how I hire my people, and it's pretty easy.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think Telegram, all those spaces are really great, especially when you're early and, you know, not everybody's working with a lot of funding. Really comes down to people that are passionate about the project. So going into the spaces where they're already proactively there is definitely the best way to do it when you're working with less budget or just trying to do that. One of the guys on my team just launched an NFT project called Mechavax. You know, we're recruiting every day, so we're working on a startup salary. Got all that stuff done for free because people in the community love who he is. gave a good amount of equity and share in that project, and they're building it the right way. So at the end of the day, again, comes down to that mission. Do people believe in what you're doing? Do they like what you're doing? And are they willing to follow you as a leader, sans, whatever monetary value is coming to them immediately? Cool. All right, guys. Well, thanks again. I'll be around all weekend if you guys have any questions.